Hey everyone, welcome back to Beer and Brands, Brand Federation's podcast, video podcast excuse to walk around Richmond and go to all these great breweries and drink beer and talk about brands. I'm Matt Williams, the managing partner at Brand Federation, here as always with Kelly O'Keefe, the CEO and founding partner of Brand Federation. Today, we are at Starr Hill Brewery in Scott's Addition here in Richmond, and we're here with Allie Hockman, the general manager of Starr Hill. Allie, what are we drinking today?
All right. Well, today for you two, I have some interesting beers. We've actually got for you our most popular beer right now. It's the Ramble On Hazy IPA.
Sounds good. Most popular. It's only appropriate.
Yeah.
It fits.
For you, we have our newest pilot brew, just tapped earlier this week. It's an Italian-style Pilsner, so it's a dry-hopped Pilsner.
So good.
Fantastic.
Try it.
All right.
Enjoy.
Thanks,
All right.
Allie.
Cheers.
Thanks, Allie.
Let's get to this. What do you think CMOs, CEOs should be thinking during this time about 2022, about the upcoming year? What should be in their minds as they plan for next year for their brands and for their businesses?
Well, every year, at the end of the year, CMOs and CEOs should be looking at how can we set the table in January, February, March, that first quarter period for a really productive year from a marketing point of view. And that first quarter period is when you want to start to put your foot on the gas a little bit with your advertising spending. If you do that, you kind of get this nice coast throughout the year. Also, people are back at work, they're back from home, and they want to get things done. Mm-hmm. So it's a great time to close the year with your planning for next year and really do that fine-tuning. It's almost like that tune-up and oil change you would do on your car. Do it on your marketing program and looking at everything. Mm-hmm. But I think this year is going to be even more different, and that is going to be even more important, because I think what we're hopefully seeing is that we're winding down to a period where our world will not be dominated just by COVID and elections. We've had elections the last couple of years. We've had COVID obviously significantly impacting society for the last couple of years. And so we're looking at a 2022 that could be a year where we can all take a breath and start a new chapter. And I think people are thinking about that. What do you think?
I think that's totally right. I think COVID has kind of rewired the consumer and customer brain. Those kind of traumas, you don't go through those kind of traumas and have the kind of traumas that millions of us have had with COVID without being changed in some ways.
No question.
So if I'm a CEO or a chief marketing officer, I'm thinking, okay, how have my consumers and my customers' brains been changed by COVID? How have their attitudes shifted? How have their priorities shifted? How has what's important to them in their lives changed? And how does my brand fit in that new context? It's going to be different.
It's definitely going to be different. We know this because we know that the years following the Great Depression impacted the people who went through that for their whole lives. Seniors today, their behavior in terms of spending, in terms of savings, in terms of what they value, in terms of priorities, was significantly shaped by the Great Depression. And then the post-war years, post-World War II, once again, it had a seismic impact on the economy, on our purchase decisions, on our behavior. Now we're going through something that arguably is just as significant as those two events.
I think there's no doubt. And so if I were talking to a CEO or a CMO right now, I would be counseling her that everything you think you know about your customers' attitudes, you need to revisit. You need to look on skeptically, because those brains have changed and their attitudes have changed. And if you're operating with old research or old consumer insights pre-pandemic, even in the middle of the pandemic, you need to revisit it, because your customers are not thinking the same way.
Yeah, so we're seeing this, of course. We've talked about the Great Resignation on earlier programs, but we're seeing this in the behavior of millennials. I think we're starting to see it in the behavior of boomers. I think I'm hearing from CEOs and CMOs who are saying, I used to think I knew what was going on with my employees and my customers, and now I don't get it. Everything has shifted. Yeah. What do you think some of the big shifts will be?
Well, think about all the things that have happened. You go through these traumas, you get taken out of the workforce, you get isolated from your friends, you get isolated from your family, right? all these things that you've defined your life around get removed from you. And by doing that, you get all the time and the space you need, even in the middle of COVID, to start to reprioritize your life. And you start to realize what's really important. You also start to realize how fragile it all is, how easily it could be taken away from you. And I think, we've talked about the Great Resignation. We're going through something now that's like the Great Reprioritization.
Right? I love that.
People are starting to think
exactly
about
right.
What's really important to me. How do I want to spend my time? How do I really want to spend my money? Maybe it's not working at that job I hate for wages that aren't fair. You know what? I'm getting out. And we're seeing that happen. Maybe it's focusing more money on my house and redoing my house. I've always talked about doing it, but I've never done it. Now I'm going to do it. We're seeing that happen in that sector too.
Yes.
So these things that are important to people have always been important, but COVID pushed it to the forefront. And now we're seeing people act on that reprioritization. And that's going to happen, I think, in spades in 2022.
I think that's fascinating, and I love coining the reprioritization. I think that's exactly what we're going to see across every sector. I think we're going to see people put more value on relationships than on things. They're going to put more value on experiences than on possessions. We're going to see people who, if they can afford to do so, are going to dial back their work weeks or their work hours, and they're going to take whatever financial hit is involved in that to be able to reclaim some of their life for the things that are important to them.
Yeah, I think as we look at this happening, the other thing I would tell my CEO friend to look at is keep an eye on the economy. It's been roaring back. We've all seen it happen, but there are some things starting to happen now where the market's starting to wobble a little bit occasionally. Inflation's starting to raise its head in a way that's a little scary. People are starting to make noises about raising interest rates. All those things are going to have disquieting effects on 2022. So it's going to be a very interesting year.
Yeah, and that's interesting. It's not a year to relax and rest on your laurels.
Yeah, or rest on your past knowledge. Everything you thought you knew is going to be thrown into question next year.
While all that sounds maybe a little daunting, I will say that too often people are looking at these shifts and these risks as something that only have negative consequences. The smart brands are looking at these things and saying, so how can I profit from this?
Yeah.
How can I respond to these consumers in ways that really relate to where their heads are at now? And how can I be the first one in my competitive set to do this?
Yeah. We always tell our clients, you have to know something about your customer and their lives and how they think that your competitors don't know. Well, now's your chance, because everything you and your competitors knew is wrong.
It's a clean slate.
It's a clean slate. Go find out. Go find out how your customers are thinking in this new world, because you're going to be surprised.
That's great. This is the time to take a moment, to reset your marketing plans, to do a little research, to really try and be the one who figures out what's going on, and to capitalize on that as a competitive weapon. I love it.
No doubt. All right, Kelly, time for the lightning round. And this is where we talk about things that are going on in the news and what we think they mean from a brand perspective, right?
Great.
You can't do this without talking about the elections.
Oh,
that
do we have
just
to?
got finished, right? You thought you were done. You're not
Do we
done. We're
have
getting
to?
dragged back into talking about politics. And I want to challenge us to do this in a way that makes it impossible for the people in podcast land to tell what our political leanings are. People
like
who know
that.
us know where we stand. But I want us to talk about the Democrats and the Republicans as brands, right? Elections are fundamentally a battle of brands, especially as you get into a national level. The Democratic Party has a brand, the Republican Party has a brand, and elections are a referendum on what those brands stand for and how powerful they are. So, what do you think the brand of the Republican Party is?
Oh, man. The interesting thing about the Republican and Democratic Party right now is it's one of the only arenas in life where you can run a race with only two participants and both of them can be losing.
That's depressing.
It is depressing. Honestly, the whole election was another depressing mess of two parties that are mostly focused on talking about what's wrong with the other guy, and not focused at all about talking about what they can do for us that's new, that's exciting. They're mostly preaching to a base that has become increasingly important to both of them. And they're failing to talk to all of us and inspire us. I can't remember the last time. Well, I can, but I'm not going to go there because you told me I can't show any sides here. But it's been a long time since I've really been inspired by a campaign.
Yeah, isn't it amazing that the kind of gravitational pull that happens in a political fight to go to the negative? We all expect it, we all hate it, we all wish it didn't happen. And if we think as brand counselors, when would we ever counsel our clients to
Never.
Go run an attack ad that says your competitor is wrong for America? I mean, we would never do that because the blowback would be immediate and it would be awful. And it would make everybody who works at that company feel slimy and gross. But it happens every time an election comes around.
It absolutely does. I don't understand this. Election campaign advisors, please stop. You're just making it worse for all of us. Just stop. Talk about something that is inspiring, that's uplifting, that we hold in common as opposed to something that divides us. And I'm talking to both parties now because I don't think anyone's doing a good job at this. We would never talk to a Fortune 500 client and say, let's attack the other guys. There's no need to do that. It doesn't really help. It invites criticism. It invites division. And that's not where brands should be. And I don't understand why we're trapped in this cycle of just, it's mud wrestling all day and all night.
I think it goes back to your first point about this is an inherently binary choice, right? You might have a third-party candidate who's going to siphon off 2 or 3 percentage points of the vote, but it's really an inherently binary choice. So part of my job, if I'm the Republican candidate running against the Democratic candidate, is not just to tell people what I stand for and why they should vote for me. Part of my job is to just paint that other person in the most negative possible light so somebody says, well, I can't vote for them, I guess I'll vote for him. And it's so easy, it's so convenient, and there's such a formula attached to it that it's probably naive to think that it's not going to happen, but it happens so much, and it casts such a negative light on what should be an inspiring civic conversation every time the election rolls around, that's not what it is. It's just this thing that I just want to turn away from and tune out.
Yeah, and I think what it's leading us to is a time when our overall confidence in our public institutions, our public officials, is very, very low. And it's low because most of them spend most of their time talking about how much it sucks.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, just look in Virginia. We had 2 gubernatorial candidates that honestly, they're both decent guys. They both appear to be people who are more or less in the middle, more or less have some experience in business and governance, and more or less would be okay. Instead of talking about what they could do for us, they spent the entire time talking about how bad the other one was, and that left us with a really bad taste in our mouth. Not like the Starr Hill bitter.
Exactly. So I have an idea about thinking about the parties as brands, right? And the ultimate product of any kind of brand assessment, brand strategy process is to come around with a statement that is compelling and interesting and clear about what your brand stands for, what it's about, right? I think the Republicans have a very clear one. And I'll be interested in your take on this. I think the Republican brand proposition is, we will protect you from the things that scare you. I think that's what the Republican brand's about. It's whether maybe that's immigration, maybe that's crime, maybe that's
terrorism.
Economic terrorism, you name it. It's all about protecting you from things that scare you. Now that's a pretty motivating thing.
It is,
right? If I'm afraid of things and somebody comes in and says, "Don't worry, I can keep those things from hurting you," I'm interested in that. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the Democrats have. I don't know what the Democratic brand proposition is, other than we're not Donald Trump.
Man, I think you're right, at least as evidenced by this most recent election. I don't think the Democrats have a very clear statement or strategy. In some ways, they have leaned also to the "we're going to protect you" kind of messaging, that negative messaging that says, if you're a person of color, if you're LGBTQ, if you are an immigrant, if you have a non-Christian religion or no religion at all, we're going to keep you protected. But it still falls back into that same defensive posturing.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It's not uplifting you. It's not telling you what you can do, or what America can do for you.
Yeah, and I think the Democratic brand could be built around an appeal that's similar to that, but not as negative as that, and that is bringing back equality to the United States. If they pinned everything they did around this idea of regaining American equality, I think there could be something very interesting there, because they could pull in those constituents that you're talking about, and they would acknowledge the idea that we've devolved to a point as a country where we don't have the level of equality of opportunity that Americans believe they deserve. And that if the Democratic Party said, our brand is about restoring American equality, there's something very interesting there that's not negative and can be very inspirational. I think really addresses a very real issue in the country now. But, you know, who are we? We're just two guys sitting around drinking beer talking about political brands.
That's right.
All right, this is our fourth installation of Beer and Brands, and I think we have talked about Facebook now 4 out of 4 times. Because you can't do a segment in a conversation like this about the news without talking about Facebook, because they're always in the news.
It's
and
the
now
gift that keeps giving.
It keeps on giving. And this month, Mark Zuckerberg has given us the gift of changing the name of Facebook to Meta. Go.
Oh my gosh, I just got to tell you, Matt, what a brilliant move. I can't think of anything negative to say
Oh my God.
about, no, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Mega is, you know, in a long list of stupid things that Facebook has done, I think it tops everything else at this point.
It's a long list.
It's got a number of things wrong with it. One, everybody thinks that renaming the parent corporation is just a kind of artful, or in this case, artless dodge to try and deflect attention from all the negative publicity that Facebook has been facing lately. And so that's a problem. I'm not even going to comment on the merit of the name or the brand, but I will say that the other problem is that Facebook seems really to believe that our future resides on a world where we can strap on some virtual devices and we can encounter nature, we can encounter our friends and have conversations with them, we can take a stroll in the park, and I think, you know what? We can do that.
Just go do it.
We can just do that. We don't need a device to allow us to have a conversation with a friend or to go to an interesting place. In fact, I think it's a little better when you're actually there.
Like the irony is so thick here in the sense that Zuckerberg has always talked about Facebook as a brand that was all about connecting people, and he's still doing that. He's now saying that the metaverse is going to be the next wave of doing that. But all it's going to do is disconnect people in the way you're talking about, right? I don't need to connect with nature with virtual goggles. I'll go out and connect with nature. I don't need to go ride my bike on a virtual ride. I'll go ride my bike. So the idea of connections manifesting themselves in a way that fundamentally disconnects people from things and places and people is just so bizarre to me. Now, I can imagine that there's a whole corporate strategy side to this name change that says, look, we're under a lot of heat. If we change our name to Meta, it gives us a little bit of cover to make some organizational changes. You know, it'll be interesting to see what happens to Sheryl Sandberg and some of the senior managers now that Zuckerberg and his team can use the Meta change as an excuse to restructure Facebook, which I bet will happen soon. So it may give him a little cover there. It may give him a little bit of cover with Washington to say that, you know, well, now I'm not Facebook's CEO anymore. Facebook's CEO is now that guy. So you need to talk to that guy. But man, from a branding standpoint, it just feels to be such a transparently obvious ploy to shine a shiny object over here so that we don't look at all the terrible stuff that the old brand did.
And we've never seen that work.
No.
You know, it's not like anybody's talking about Alphabet these days, unless you're picking up a book and reading to a child. Right. You know, Alphabet is the parent corporation of Google, but we don't talk about Alphabet, we talk about Google. Yeah. The consumer won't play with that three-card Monte strategy. And I don't think this sort of rehashed Second Life on steroids concept of the future, it's like, that's not a future I want to live in. I think it's incredibly tone deaf. Coming out of COVID, coming out at a time when I think we crave human interaction, to imagine that the future of the company is going to rest on a system that creates digital interaction to replace human interaction.
Yep.
I think they're off, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say, not going to work.
Yeah. Well, there you have it. We're 4 for 4 now. All right, we're back with Ali Hockman, the general manager of Starr Hill. Thanks for having us. It's great to be here. It's an amazing place. Tell us about Starr Hill Brewery as a brand. When you think about what makes Starr Hill special or different, how should we think about it?
Well, Starr Hill's had a really long history here in Virginia. We've been around since 1999, so we've gone through a lot of different changes and iterations over the years, not only of our brand, but our look, the way we present ourselves to people, the different organizations that we work with. When we first started, we were very entrenched in the music scene, so we would travel to music festivals and sponsor a lot of festivals around the state. And our original location was a brew pub with a music hall upstairs, so we had a very close connection to music. And I think that sort of camaraderie and like friendship and all the fun feelings and experiences that go along with music festivals and live concerts is something that we have tried to embody from the beginning. But in general, I think nowadays, especially post-COVID, when large gatherings are kind of just starting to come back and people are taking a new look at how those operate. Over the last couple of years, we've been more not kind of repositioning ourselves, but not so specific as the music genre, but more about having a broad array of beverages for all different kinds of consumers and being really accessible to all different kinds of consumers.
Ellie, I've got a question for you. Matt and I have been talking about brands. And one of the things we like to talk about, and we certainly talked about this time, is that brands tend not to win by attacking their competitors. They win by talking about their strengths, and you've talked about that. One of the things that we've noticed as we've been going from brew pub to brew pub is that you guys seem to like each other. The competition within the craft beer scene in Richmond, you sort of know each other and help each other. Is that true? And
Definitely.
Why is that?
Definitely. Well, I think I've heard it said many times in many industries, but a lot in the craft beer industry, a rising tide lifts all boats is commonly used. So I think, especially here in this neighborhood in Scott's Addition, we meet up every couple months and discuss the different events that we can partner on together, just to bring more people together in our neighborhood, but in general to bring more business to the neighborhood.
That's great.
And I mean, you'll find when people call us here or people come to visit and they ask our staff for recommendations, we'll tell them all about the other breweries, cideries, wineries in the area, just to kind of, we want to keep them close, but we want them to know that we're the experts on our neighborhood, and that they can trust us, and that just kind of builds up that reputation and that relationship and keeps them coming back.
That's cool. Makes you feel good, doesn't it?
It does.
And that wraps up round 4 of Beer and Brands with Brand Federation. Thanks again for joining us. If you like it, hit like, tell your friends. We'd love to see you on the next installment of Beer and Brands, where Kelly O'Keefe and I will travel on to another brewery here in the great city of Richmond. Talk about beer, talk about brands, and if we don't see you between now and then, have a wonderful Thanksgiving season.
But I hope we see you for our special holiday show.
Yes, we are doing a special holiday show where we will have our naughty and nice brands list. So be sure to tune into that one.
Could we go for 5 for 5 on Facebook?
I think you might hear about Facebook.